I'd like to introduce our first keynote speaker, somebody with whom I have shared probably more beers than I should have over the years. Steve O'Grady from RedMonk is going to be talking about the new Kingmakers, that's you, developers. And I just want to remind everybody that he is going to be doing a book signing this evening for his book, The New Kingmakers, at the Seaport Hotel. There is free beer involved. And any rumors that he has to drink a beer for every signing is strictly not true, but we'll try. All right, Steve, come on up. Thank you.
Yeah, that would actually be very entertaining. It'd be a very long night. So let me just get a sense before I start. How many of you in the room, just put up your hands. You don't have to stand up. I'm not going to be the taskmaster that Mike was. How many of you in the room, show of hands, are developers? Outstanding. All right, so this is going to be much easier than it is normally. When I give this talk to folks on the business side, they tend to, well, let's say they tend to be a little bit less receptive. The basic idea to the new Kingmakers is very simple. We at RedMonk, we're an analyst firm. We're an analyst firm in many ways like other analyst firms, but in one sort of crucial way, we're very different. We have sort of always believed, as long as we've been around, and it's funny that the 10-year sort of anniversary of Eclipse, RedMonk turned 10 in, let's see, November, I guess it was, this past fall. And as long as we've been around, we've looked at it and said, hey, adoption isn't being done the same way it has always been done. Right? Adoption used to be this sort of top-down phenomenon, and we'll go through sort of all the mechanics, but we've always believed that developers, sort of are in fact the new Kingmakers. And the funny thing is that when we did this 8 or 10 years ago, people, let's just say they were a little bit less receptive. We talked, to vendors. Vendors would come and brief us, and they'd talk to us about their product or, hardware, software, whatever. And we'd say, okay, that's great. What's your developer strategy? And they would kind of give us a blank look and say, what? What do you mean? Somebody's going to buy this. Who cares what the developers think? And that wasn't the way that we saw things. And as I said, this is, 10 years ago, this was sort of a strange phenomenon. But a funny thing, started happening a couple years ago. We started having people come up to us, chip companies. Manufacturers of specialized storage gear, would start coming to us and say, hey, developers are really important. Developers are going to mean the sort of difference between success and failure for my product. What do I do? What does this mean? So, this is why we're here, right? We're here because all of you who raise your hands, are ultimately making the decisions that drive technology adoption, that drive essentially the future of the industry. But to get to the future, we have to understand sort of where we've come from. And in the beginning, software was really just an enabler. It was an afterthought. Is there anybody in the room, just put up your hand, anybody in the room familiar with Share? Okay, so that's nobody. As far as I can tell, I'm kind of blinded here. Share is a user group. It's actually still around. It was founded in 1955 by customers of the IBM 7 Series hardware out of LA. And this user group, sort of existed. It was, sort of in many respects, sort of a proto-open source group. Because what they did is that they shared tips, they shared scripts, they shared configurations. And in some cases, they even shared customized versions of the operating systems themselves, which in the early days, IBM distributed in source form. Because in the early days, again, software was just an enabler. There were certainly commercial software markets, but it was largely one-off. So 50s and 60s and so on, basically anything you could do, to encourage software development for a hardware platform, you did. And you gave away the software because at the end of the day, that wasn't where you made your money. You made your money on the hardware itself. This was sort of the nature of the business. But obviously times change. And sort of over time, software sort of changed from a means to an end, a means to sell hardware, to an end in and of itself. And there were a lot of different factors sort of involved, but many of you have probably heard this story. The story sort of the first Microsoft Windows deal. This wasn't Windows yet, it was MS-DOS. But the interesting thing, what a lot of people don't know, is that one of the critical realizations on the part of Microsoft, and more specifically on the part of Bill Gates, was that he extracted a sort of George Lucas style concession from IBM. So many of you have probably heard the story of George Lucas and Star Wars and so on. So Star Wars was shopped around to a lot of studios. Nobody wanted it. This is one of those sort of hilarious stories in retrospect. Nobody wanted one of the sort of highest grossing film franchises of all time. But Lucas was still sort of very well regarded as a director, and he was encouraged to pursue much more money from the contract than he actually got. Instead, however, he had the foresight to understand that the merchandising rights attached to Star Wars were actually going to be something that was quite valuable. So instead of negotiating for a higher salary, he negotiated for merchandising rights. And sort of the rest, as they say, is history. And any of you who sort of grew up in that era, I know I did. I had a bunch of action figures. And if you look at the kids today, I was over at a friend's house, and they had like the whole Millennium Falcon. The damn thing's like 3 feet across. And all of this money, sort of all the licensing rights there, went to Lucas. And they went to Lucas because he had the foresight to understand what he had. He had the foresight to understand that in and of itself would be valuable, which the studio missed. And similarly, Gates, at the time that they licensed MS-DOS to IBM for distribution on the PC, saw that software itself could be a thing that had value. And this was sort of unique. So IBM, when they put together the PC, this is in the early 80s. I think it launched 82. In the early part of the 80s, we had PCs. You had Apple, you had Commodore, you had a couple different things in the market. IBM looked at this and said, well, we need a product. We need to compete in this market. So they put together a piece of hardware using off-the-shelf components, which in and of itself is very unusual for IBM. And they cared so little about the software that they were content to outsource it to this tiny 5-year-old startup called Microsoft. And Microsoft, in this deal, they extracted the right to distribute MS-DOS, the right to distribute this operating system software on any platform they chose. So yes, it was a great deal for Microsoft in the sense that they got to distribute on IBM, and IBM was a big company. But the ability to license that, apart from that platform, to license that to whomever hardware manufacturer they chose, was a big deal, was a big opportunity. And it's one that they leveraged. And they leveraged quite successfully. So at the peak here, if we look at this particular chart, this is a chart of Microsoft's market cap. The peak all the way up, right around just before the turn of the century. At that point, Microsoft was worth about 3 times what IBM was. And they did this primarily by selling software. Right? This thing that, really at the time that MS-DOS was first licensed, nobody really cared about. Nobody was really making big money about. It founded some of the biggest companies in the world, many of whom are sponsors here today. Many of whom have made a mint in terms of selling and licensing software. So this was sort of quite the departure. If we think about the 50s and 60s, and software was great, software still had a lot of intrinsic value in the sense that none of the hardware worked without it. But as far as the commercial value wasn't there. You fast forward a couple decades, and all of a sudden it's building some of the largest businesses in the world. But again, things have a way of changing, and things have a way of not necessarily staying the same. So this is something of a game of arbitrary endpoints. I'm sure that we could all sort of in the room debate some of the different start points and endpoints for quote-unquote the era of enterprise software. I picked 75 in this case because it was sort of the founding of Microsoft. And Microsoft, sort of among others, as we've seen, was one of the first companies to really illustrate how you could make money from software. And for the most part, most of this money came from businesses. For the most part, it came from the innovation, sort of quote-unquote in some cases, that came from the enterprise was about building sort of big software for businesses. And in 1998, things began to change a little bit. And we'll see that in a couple different sort of forms, but this is one of the most obvious. As you might be able to read from the chart, this is just a sort of plot of the gross margin of Microsoft's business over time. Beginning, I can't even read the chart, I think it's 87. And if you look at this chart, there's a peak in terms of the realizable margin. That peaks right about the late 90s, right around the 1998 timeframe that we're talking about. There's another reason I picked 1998, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But if we look at this, what this tells us isn't that you can't make money from software, right? That's not the case. You can still make money from software. You can still make very good money from software. What this chart indicates, and we'll see some other charts later, is that it's getting harder to sell software alone. You know, these sort of enormous businesses that have grown up explicitly and expressly just to sell software, well, you know, they've had a tougher time. And they've had a tougher time because this definition, you know, software equals business software, has been explicitly and implicitly challenged over the years. Because for many years, as we've talked about, these are the kinds of guys that controlled enterprise software, and therefore these are the kinds of guys that controlled innovation in software, period. Right? And these aren't sort of any particular guys, it's just a random smattering of CIO pictures taken from around the web. But these were the people, ultimately, who sort of determined the future of the technology industry. Because at the end of the day, the companies building software built it for these people. Why? Because they had money. Because they would pay for it. You know, this was, you know, software was a commercial opportunity. It was an end to itself, and therefore it needed budget. These people had budget, and therefore software was designed to meet their needs, not yours. But, you know, there's a great phrase, I'm sure many of you have heard it before. Tim O'Reilly's a big fan of it. We at Redmonk love it as well, which says that the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And we're big believers that this is the case. And in fact, Redmonk, you know, is, you know, something of a validation of that. Because the things that we were saying a decade ago that seem really strange and weird now are, in many cases, in many contexts, taken for granted. So 1991, I probably don't need to educate anybody in this room, you know, sort of on the founding of the Linux project. You know, this was the first release. But in other words, if you think about this, I mean, this is bizarre, right? This is the project of a Finnish graduate student that would later go on to found sort of multi-billion-dollar businesses that would see the investment of $1 billion from that same company that didn't really care about software when they licensed it to Microsoft and IBM. You know, this is a real phenomenon. A couple years after that, in 1994, you know, was the initial release for Netscape Navigator. This got millions of people onto the web. Right? And this was, again, beginning to break down the sort of boundaries between, you know, how software was traditionally delivered. Right? And obviously in 1994, you didn't have many things. You didn't have Google and any of the sort of essentially products that we take for granted now on the web. But for the first time, you could begin to deliver software to anybody with a browser over a network. Didn't require a client and necessarily need to download something specific, you know, that was native to a particular operating system. I could use Mac or, you know, Linux, Windows. I had the ability to access services via the web. So again, things begin to change because it gives everybody in this room, all the developers in this room, a direct line to customers that they'd never had before. 1995 was a big year in sort of many respects. It saw the release of a couple projects that ultimately ended up getting lumped together. So Apache is sort of the you know, perhaps one of the most well-known. It was an HTTP server, again, built and sort of released as open source that was good enough that most of the people offering commercial alternatives said, the hell with this. It's as good or better than our product. You know, this is foolish for us to compete with it. So, you know, given that we can sort of, you know, the terms of the license allow us to release it and sort of embed it in our own products, let's just do that. Again, you know, this was a you know, there were many companies that had commercial versions of the product, and they ultimately gave up. Because the efforts of developers, the efforts of people in this room, basically erased that as a commercial market, eliminated it entirely. A couple months after that, the first release of MySQL. This is a database that I'm sure actually some people in the room probably still have a lot of bad things to say about. I know over the years, I have listened to sort of hours and hours and hours of commentary from people who know a ton about databases, you know, and are data experts. And they'll tell me all about how this is the worst thing ever, how it's a terrible database, and so on, all of which may or may not be true. I know one thing that's true is that this is the most popular relational database on the planet. Why? Because it was freely available. Because developers could download it and, you know, without reference to anybody. They didn't have to ask for permission. They don't have to go to procurement and say, hey, I need a license for a database. They can just download it and use it. And also, it's lightweight. It doesn't have many of the features that developers don't care about. In PHP, this was a piece of software that was written to, at first, to manage a set of home pages. A couple years after this, sort of in the early part of the last decade, it's powering 2/3 of the world's websites. Why? Again, we see this pattern over and over. It was freely available, it worked well enough, and developers embraced it. And they made it, sort of into a phenomenon themselves. None of these products, Linux, Apache, PHP, MySQL, none of these were created by analysts like myself, any of you CIOs or CTOs in the room. It got here because developers liked them and used them. And this is a pattern we see play out sort of over time, because it changes the dynamics. When I was a systems integrator, prior to becoming an analyst, I would go out and talk to customers and say, all right, here are the kinds of things you want to do, and here's the software and the hardware you're going to need. Right? We would put together these plans, and these plans were often enormously expensive. Right? I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in some cases, to do what today are sort of considered trivial things. Why? Because everything had to be paid for. We had to pay for the software. We had to pay for the hardware. We had to pay for the implementation of that software, typically from services people working for those companies. But in 1998, and certainly there were companies that preceded this, but in 1998, we see the creation of Google. Well, why is this relevant? Well, for several reasons. Google, sort of first and most important, is a company that made money with software rather than from software, right? So many today don't consider Google a technology company because they don't sell technology. Well, for the most part, they do in apps and so on. But the bulk of their revenue derives from advertising. So there are some, certainly in my line of work, that don't consider Google to be a sort of quote-unquote technology company in the way that an IBM, a Microsoft, and Oracle is. I would dispute that. I don't care what the revenue model is. I care whether or not a company builds and releases technology and knows what they're doing with technology. Google obviously does. Right? They took a variety of free software, and most obviously the Linux kernel, and they built a multi-billion-dollar business in it. A business that's big enough that if you stack it up with the people who make money from software, it's a top 5 market cap. So a very, very large business indeed. And they did this with software rather than from software. And as I said, it built itself from free software. And while certainly there are those in the room, I'm sure, who have their issues with the amount of free software that they've given back, they've at the very least published details on how they've created software internally. Right? So the Google file system paper and the MapReduce paper give rise to Hadoop. Sort of an open source implementation of techniques pioneered, within, well, at least first implemented at scale, within a company like Google. So they built itself from free software they consume, free software they built for themselves. This is a different way of doing things. And to sort of give you an idea of the economics, the shift in economics here, there was a financial research company that researched YouTube, right? And the cost of building YouTube on the backs of open source software versus the cost of building back YouTube on the backs of Oracle's Exadata platform. Anybody want to take a guess as far as the multiple? How much more expensive it was? How much? All right. So the cost for building it on open source software, a little over $100 million. The cost of building it on the backs of Exadata were over $550 million. All right? So when we think about what's being created here, you take this open source software that can be used and sort of accessed by developers, again, for free, in most cases, and it has profound implications for the economics. Okay. So, Google, as part of that is a company not beholden to the enterprise. A company that, we've seen that most of the innovation came out of the enterprise, not with Google. This is what we refer to as the developer era. It's a sort of era in which you guys, all of you in the room, are now in charge. And how did we get here? We got here, as we've seen, through open source. So for the first time in the companies, developers didn't need permission from anybody to access software. They could do this themselves without reference to anybody. If I need an operating system, I have it. If I need a virtualization layer, I have it. Database, I have it. And obviously, for everybody in the room, I need a sort of integrated development environment. Fantastic. I got it. They still needed hardware, though. And this was a holdup for many years until 2006. Amazon comes along. And all of a sudden, as my friend Flip Cromer says, EC2 means that anybody with a $10 bill can run a 10-machine cluster of terabyte of distributed storage for 8 hours. Think about that. In years prior, you'd have to go out and buy that up front, pay the upfront capital expense. Now I can use it for 8 hours and ditch it for 10 bucks. This is something even an individual can afford. So with hardware and software, what was still missing, to empower you guys? You have the software that you need, you have the hardware that you need. What's left? Well, what might we be able to deliver in the context of a network, in context of software as a service? Probably a couple things. Education and training. Stanford Online. I don't know if any of you have followed the enrollments for the computer science courses. One of the courses had 160,000 people enrolled in it. Right? Even if it has terrible completion rates, it's 160,000 people for a single course. edX is a collaboration between MIT and Harvard. Khan Academy and Coursera. Many of you have probably looked at these yourselves. Stack Overflow. How many people in the room have used Stack Overflow? All of you. Okay? So this allows you to take the software and the hardware that you now have essentially free or very low cost access to and use it better and build your skills and become more efficient. You also get to collaborate better. All of you in the room, I'm sure, have had experiences, working within the context of the Eclipse Foundation, sort of being enabled, as part of that process. I'm sure many people from the Apache Software Foundation would say the same thing. We have foundations sort of with other motivations and other governance patterns in GitHub, Bitbucket, or SourceForge. Right? They allow developers to work more efficiently together across geographical, corporate, or other boundaries. And you have marketplaces for goods and services. Years ago, to be an independent developer meant that you had to be comfortable with sales, you had to be comfortable with the pitch, you had to be comfortable with, in some cases, cold calling. Or most developers said, the hell with that, dude, I just want to code. Well, you can do that now because you can market yourself hyper efficiently through marketplaces, Elance, Odesk, Guru.com. There's a number of these. Craigslist even, is a place that some people pick up developers. And if not, you can manufacture a product and sell it directly to consumers, via the App Store, Play Marketplace, and so on. So you add all these up, and there's one thing that's still sort of missing. Some of the stuff still costs money. In other words, sure, EC2 is a lot cheaper, than buying that hardware up front, but you run it for a while and your bills rack up. So you need access to capital, and it's been granted. This is a chart. This is research done by a gentleman by the name of Chris Tacey, and it basically looks at the number of venture deals against the size of those venture deals. So what's happened is that venture capitalists looked at this and said, all right, the cost of software has come down, in some cases to zero. The cost of hardware is way down. So we can start way more businesses with a bunch of smaller deals. So you see things like Techstars, Y Combinator begin to sort of generate cash for startups, for developers like yourselves at volume. And the net, ultimately, is that this is what we see. This is the sort of the reality that we see every day at an accelerating number of companies, is that IT decision makers think one thing is being used. What's actually being used is what developers want to use, because they get to use what they want, because they don't have the same throttles, the same constraints on their adoption previously. So developers have never been more empowered than today. I'll blow through these because I'm running out of time. Language adoption. This is an eye chart. You're not supposed to sort of make it out. But if you look at it, there are probably 30 or 40 languages that are in heavy use today. Obviously, sort of a smaller portion of them command the most adoption. But we've never seen sort of more diversity in languages. Same with standards. This is from Programmable Web. It's a couple years old, but I think that the point holds. You had a concerted effort by some of the largest tech companies in the industry to impose their will on a set of standards, a set of web services standards. Developers revolted. This is the result. Consider software adoption. Open source, in many cases, is still the default. MySQL is the most adopted database on the planet. Apache is still the leading web server, and so on. In market performance, is there anybody from Oracle in the room? Okay, you guys probably won't like this chart that much. This is basically, it's a little bit unfair. The first 6 bars here are the percentage of software revenue that comes from new licenses at Oracle. You can see it's trending down over time. Much has been made in the press in the last couple of weeks about Oracle's recent quarterly results. That last bar is the quarterly result, the last quarterly result. What we see is that it's getting harder for Oracle. Oracle's software revenue is growing. They're growing their service and maintenance business actually quite well. But it's getting harder for them to sell new licenses. Why? Because developers are picking, and they're picking open source. So the reality is clear. Developers, from our standpoint, are very much the new Kingmakers. You guys are the ones in charge. You guys are the ones who are going to set the direction moving forward. And with that, I believe I'm out of time. So where to get it? Hopefully many of you got a copy of the book. As Mike said, I'll be around tonight drinking beers and be happy to sign books for you. And there's more information at thenewkingmakers.com. And that's it. I'm out of time. Thank you.